Hi, this is Brian with Prophetless Media and Post. Today we're going to talk about the uVolume tool that was just added to the beta version of Fusion. So this is the uVolume tool, brings in these VDB files, and they are full 3D volumes that we can use inside of Fusion, that we can change the color and the way that they look and get some pretty cool results. So you can see as I move along, this is a full 3D volume. If I were to select the volume inside the window here, you can see I can rotate around the 3D object. It's a full 3D volume of this tornado. Now I got these volumes for free off of Janga FX. I'll put a link down below to where you can get some free volumes to play around with. They got some pretty cool ones on there. They got some explosions and smoke and stuff like that, and bring it into Fusion and start playing around with these cool effects. So anyway, this is a full 3D volume, which means that we could take this one asset and multiply it multiple times, and because it's a full 3D asset, we can turn it around, we can do all kinds of different changes to it, and it'll look like 5 completely different tornadoes, even though it's one asset. So this is a pretty cool feature. Also, because it's full 3D, that means we can add in lighting. So I'm going to add in some lights. Now you really won't see anything yet because we're just a white color. As we start playing around with the settings, you'll see how the lighting works. It's actually really cool. So in the renderer, we need to put on scene and enable shadow so that we can get the lighting that we want. Maybe you can see it. Let me see. If I bring the exposure way up, you can start to see barely a little bit of blue on the edge, but we'll play around with that a little bit. In the uVolume, let's go over some of these settings. So at the very top, we have the timing, so you can set the in and out points. We have a time scale, so we can speed up or slow down our animation. If we bring it down to something like 0.5, that'll cut the speed in half, so it'll slow down the turn of the tornado. Or we can bring it up to 2 or 3 times the speed by going up 2 or 3. Then we have a frame offset, and this would be perfect for being able to replicate the exact same asset, but make them look completely different. So we can use a frame offset to help with the animation. Then we have an option to reverse the animation and even loop it. Quite a few options here within the timing, but the real look of it is right in here. So when we get to density and emissions. So in density, we have density field. And density field, if we click on that, right now we only have one option. We have just the density field that we can use. But the VDB files are similar to like an EXR for volumes, which means there can be other fields that we can use inside of the VDB files. And when we take a look at one of the other files that I brought in, it has extra fields in it, and we can play with each one of those separately. But the density is going to be perfect for this tornado. We have a scale right here, and as I bring up the scale, you can see that it gets more dense. So we can bring this way up. We could bring it really far up. I can go up to like 50. You can see now it's really, really, really dense. But we can't really see anything because it's only in color mode. So just to get a look, let's go to field. And once I do, the emission field is set to density. Now we're getting this really cool look. Now this is because I have this light on. If I turn the light off, it's going to look a little bit different. But if I put the light on, you can see how we can get some really cool looks. And so I could bring up that exposure. Now if we start to press play, you're seeing this cool like tornado, and we can really get into customizing this however we want. Okay, but the density that's pretty high density. This is probably more effective for something like an explosion, but still it looks pretty cool. I'm going to bring the scale back down to 1. Go over the different emissions types too. We kind of went over the color. The color is basically it's what you think it is. If I bring the color here, it's going to change the color of the volume pretty equally across the entire image. Then we have field, and that's going to use this emission field for our color. So if I have this set to something like red, we have a little bit of options here using the scale to work on where that density is going to be. I can change the scale of the emissions tint, and you can see as I go down. So if I go really low to like 0.15, it's really kind of, the light is helping kind of highlight the outside, but it's really just the core is red, right? Or we can bring it way up and really bring out, if I go way up, you can see now we're starting to get those light almost transparent areas are now starting to get that emissions tint based off of the density. Let me just set these back. Now let's take a look at another one. Another one is black body. Now black body is what we'll be using for explosions and fire typically. It's based upon the temperature. This one right here only has the density field, so we're going to be using the density field for the temperature. We can bring down the temperature if we wanted to, or we can bring it up. So if we bring it way up, this is like a red hot tornado. So that looks pretty cool. And we can also use the scale in this aspect too. So we can scale it down certain areas, or we can bring it way up and you can see it really brightens it up. So that's how you can kind of use those. And then the last one is the gradient. So the gradient is kind of how you would expect. We're going to be using that same density field to be able to change the color range. So here, if I wanted to, I could grab, say maybe the black, and why don't we make that yellow? And then over here, let's make this color the white, just make it a green, something odd. Now that our colors are set, we have a couple different ways that we can play with this. We can use the field range, which will only grab a certain range of the density field. So if I bring this down, you're going to start to see the green color come into the center, the core, the densest part. We can play with this. We can move this whole slider around if we wanted to. We can also, let me just set that back. We can also use the gradient slider itself. So we could do the same kind of thing. We could bring the green closer, only a little bit. The outside edges will be yellow, but the denser areas will be green. So that's another way to do it. And we can use the scale to scale in the colors in combination with some of these other options. And you can see how that works. So those are the basic options for how you can set up your volume to change the look in the color. But let's now take a look at the explosion. So I'm going to grab this other one here I have. So this is a uVolume. It's going to take a second. And now we have this big explosion, right? So it starts down there and it explodes up like this. So why don't we just come somewhere around here. So now let's take a look at the settings for the explosion. So if we go over to density field and density, if we click this open, you can see not only do we have density, but we have a field called flames and temperature. Now for the density, of course, we want to keep it at density. In the emissions mode, let's go over to black body because that's what we want to use because this is an explosion. So I'm going to click on black body and you can see immediately now we're getting this kind of explosion. And the temperature field is set to flames. So now we're going to affect just the flames. That looks pretty cool right there. Right? That's a pretty nice looking explosion. We can change the temperature so we can bring it down and play with this look if we want. We can play with the scale if we want. We could actually change from flames to temperature. That's going to give you a different look and we can play with that field. Okay, to change the look. But another thing we can do is change the density. So this looks like a fireball, like a big fireball, right? But what if we wanted that look of like a big oil fire? Well, we can do that by changing the density of the explosion. So let's bring this up to something like 50. And now we're starting to get those dark clouds. Now this light is kind of strange that it's blue. Bring it down some. Why don't we play around with the light look? So we could move this around. You can see how this really, let's get just the edge of it so we get these dark lines underneath. And this really helps. I mean, if I turn it off, that looks good by itself, but it looks pretty cool with the light on it. See what else we can do. So we can bring that scale up and now we're starting to get that really fireball-y look. We could bring the temperature down maybe so it's much more smoke, or we can even bring the density way up. So let's bring that up to something like 200. Now we're getting a much denser, darker cloud, and we can play with this explosion. So that looks pretty cool. So anyway, you can play around with these tools. I just wanted to kind of show you how you can set up and how you can change the different settings in your uVolume controls so that you can take advantage of using these VDB files inside of Fusion. So anyway, if you have any problems or questions, let me know in the forum. Thanks again for watching, and I'll see you again in the next video.